Life Audio.
Welcome to the Untangling Prayer Podcast. I'm Rachel Wojo, and each week we unravel life's knots through prayer. Here you'll find practical wisdom and prayer encouragement to guide you through life's hardest seasons. Join me as we untangle life's messes together, one prayer at a time. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Rachel Wojo, and I have a wonderful guest today. She is just an amazing person that I've gotten to know. She is a 4-brand owner. Just blows me away with all that she does. Her brands are the Encourager Academy, Rebecca Scott Designs, and 1948 Leather. And I am just so thrilled to have her today because she is going to talk to us about simplifying our lives and getting things on track. Rebecca, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me on. This will be fun.
You know, you are a wife, mother, author, coach, and designer with 15 years of experience running all these brands. And if there's something that you understand, it's the need for order, systems, and fun in the everyday. So I just wanted to open up the floor to you and have you share a little bit about who you are and how you came to be the encourager.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, 15 years of doing a lot of things. And I think, like you said, if we just went for order, it would be pretty boring, wouldn't it? So I had to figure out how we were going to have some fun and put some joy in it too. So I'm Rebecca Scott. I'm from South Dakota. We farm and ranch here. We have 4 kiddos. And I always wanted to stay at home and raise my kiddos similar to what my mom got to do because she was busy sewing. I have a twin sister and 2 other brothers. And I just watched her have a lot of joy while she was in her basement studio, which she would have called her sewing room. And I just remember thinking, gosh, this gig is cool. Like being a mom and getting to sew and make matching scrunchies and matching outfits. So that was my first example of creating gives you joy. And so, as early as the age of 4, I was begging for a sewing machine and my mom actually obliged me. And so I started sewing really young and creating. And I did have a lot of joy when I was creating something, and then I would give it or I would sell it and I'd watch joy wash over the person receiving it. And I thought, this is pretty cool. And so I started sewing at the age of 4, and then I sewed throughout high school and all those things. But when I got to college, I thought I met a really cute boy and I wanted to marry him. And he made me very joyful. And so I actually went to school for radio and TV broadcasting. And I've used it a little bit, but not really. I was just like, let's just get to, I had a little bit of experience in it. And even when I got in it, it just wasn't creative enough. So I would come home and then I would sew some more, sew whatever project I wanted. And I personally love purses. It's your home away from home. It's the place that makes you feel a little bit safe. You're like, wait, I have that thing. It's in my purse. And so I love purses. And I think you can be in a boring outfit, but if you have a great bag, they're still going to compliment you. So I started sewing purses for myself. And then we were 4 newlyweds at Christmas time, and I love to give. And I thought, what are we going to give? And so I made some purses from scraps of fabric that I had. And then I started getting orders. And then it dawned on me oh my gosh, this could be the job so that I didn't have to go to radio and I could stay home, raise kids, and sew like my mom got to do. And so I did that. I quit radio. I came home and I sewed until 2 in the morning. And then I got up at 4 and sewed again. I just couldn't wait to have my own thing. And so I started sewing purses, and they thankfully were being well received. And I got a ton of feedback and kept growing it and growing it. And every time we had a kiddo, I thought, I think I need to employ another person. That kind of, they married together as I had another kid. I had to get another teammate to help me, whether it was a seamstress or maybe it was an assistant. I started adding these pieces together. And then as I kind of got these systems rolling, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I started thinking, I had a seamstress ask me very frequently, how are you doing this? Because we also farm and ranch. So we literally have animals, and I'm managing some things for the farm as well. Not a lot because they only let me do a little, but I do a little bit there. And then I was running my brand and I had tons of inventory, and she's going, how are you doing this? And I thought, well, I could show you how I'm doing this. And she was really defeated at the minute. And she said, I just feel really overwhelmed. I'm trying to get the work done. She was sewing for me. And I'm trying to raise my kids. And I see that you're doing the same thing, but you have a lot more joy while you're doing it. What is going on? So I jumped on the microphone and started a podcast. And that's where that brand was born, because I just wanted to show everybody, no, I'm not doing anything special. I'm not surviving on 4 hours of sleep. I'm not taking any magic pill. I had systems in place. And so that's where my podcast started. And that's where the academy started. They wanted more. That's why I wrote my book. They wanted more. And so all of that was born of wanting to teach people how I was doing the systems, because I had a lot of joy while I was doing my job.
I love it so much on so many levels because, for one, you don't know this about me, but I started sewing with my mom at a young age, not at the age of 4, but I was out of 9 kids. I was the one who liked to sit on the floor, like roll out all the fabric and cut out the patterns. And I entered the Christian school sewing competitions and made dresses. And so that I have that. I have not latched on to, I still have the sewing machine that my mom bought for me when I was 16, which is really special to me because she's in heaven. But there's so much of your story that I can relate to. And I love that you are a systems person because I strongly believe in that as well. I do think that this is a special gift that you have, helping people understand how to order things and how to simplify. I love the idea of simplifying because I think it's so important. You know, you have these simplifying systems that you've put into place in your work and in your life. And I just wondered if you could share, how did you go from feeling so overwhelmed to finding these solutions? What was that process like? Because I think all of us want to move in that direction in some area of our lives. So how did you do that?
Well, I have a very distinct story that'll be relatable to several of us, but I want you to remember this first. The first Bible verse is, "In the beginning, God created." So if you were the God of the universe, don't you think the first thing you do would be something that you love? So he's ultimately the best creator, right? And then nature is very in order. Humans cause a lot of chaos. But if you look at nature and the original designer and the creator, everything is in order. The tree never grows upside down. Never. It's never happened. And you're like, okay, so that is what we aspire to be, and we're made in the image of God. And so order is possible. So I would say that first. And then the story that is very relatable is my son was 18 months old, my first, and my business was 18 months old. And I was packing for an art show, or it might be called the market in your area, or a craft show or something like that. I was packing for that. And Gus kept tugging on my sweater to say, snack. He said, snack, snack. And I kept saying what moms always say, like, in a minute, in a minute. And meanwhile, my phone is dinging. My landline was going off. The doors were open, and we farm. So the flies are rolling in and out. So there's all these like distractions and all this like chaos going on. And he'd asked probably the 4th time for a snack. And I was just putting it off so I could keep loading the van for the show. And I screamed at him, stop, in the most dramatic way possible. And to this day, you guys, he's graduating this year. I still get choked up thinking of the story because I can see his little blue eyes welling up and wondering, like, why is mom overreacting to my simple request? And so in that moment, I knelt down. After I got the snack, of course, I knelt down and I just cried in the fetal position, like, God, how am I going to do this? And I didn't get the message, like, you have to quit and you have to do the business later. You have to raise your son. I got the message of how. How are you going to do both? And I pleaded for both because I wanted to create. But I also really wanted to be a good mom. And I wanted both. And so I kept saying, God, how am I going to do both? So I did something really bold in the art world. I canceled the show. They did not invite me back for 6 years. It's a big deal. Like, they do not want flighty artists. So I canceled the show, which was the right thing to do in that moment. And I looked at Gus and I'm like, all right, we're going to do this. And I took the next week and I journaled everything I was doing during the week because I thought there's got to be an order to this. I put too much things in those last minutes before I was packing for the show that could have been avoided if I would have just planned better because it wasn't my first show. So I already knew, like, wait, I've done this before. There is a pattern before. And I'm big about recognizing patterns and recognizing systems, whether they're good or bad. There's already a system you have in place. It just may not be a good one, so you don't want to call it a system, okay? So I journaled everything over the next 7 days. I was doing everything from when I gave baths to when I was feeding everybody to when I was taking care of myself to when I was checking email to when I was sewing, everything that those things are relatable that you're thinking of that you do in a week. And I took it one step further and I journaled. And then the next column, I wrote approximately how long it took me. So then I zoomed out after the week. And I mean, I don't know how many pages I filled, but I took like, how long did it take us to do lunch together? How long for the sandbox time? I wanted to know what is going on during a week and where can I see some improvement. Then I took the next week, I zoomed out and I highlighted the areas that were similar. So, okay, well, here's where I was doing all the food. And that food, I mean, that took up a lot of space right in there.
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, where was I taking care of myself? Okay, well, here's where I got my Bible time in. Here's where I was exercising. Here's where I took a bubble bath. And here's where we were doing family things. Here's where we're getting ready for church. Here's where we were talking about our week ahead. Here's where we kind of getting organized together. And then it was like, oh, well, here's where I was working and what I was doing with the working. Was this sewing or was this emailing? Like I took note of when the work days were happening. And then I took note of like, okay, there's home in here too. It's like when I was cleaning and when I was doing laundry. And so 5 systems came out of that journaling. And you just heard me say it's your me system. How do you give yourself a full charge? Then and everybody's different. Sometimes it's a nap. Sometimes it's a run. Okay. We're all going to be different. Then there was a food system that's answering the question, what's for supper? Okay. And then there was a home system. When was I doing the laundry and when was I cleaning house? Then there was a family system that was asking yourself, what is the legacy I'm living? And what is the legacy I'll leave behind? Do those 2 things come together? Are they way far apart? And then there was a work system. And that was just answering the questions, who, what, when, where, and why of what I was doing. So that's how the system started. And once I figured it out, I was like, got it. I didn't take all of them at once. But for me, in that moment, the one that was the most broke was the work system. Since I've been coaching on it for years now, I don't usually ever let you allow you to start with the work system because we all want to do that one. It seems easiest to us, passionate about it. But what I found is if we work on the other ones, our work is that much more enjoyable because we have systems in place for the other ones. And we don't want to admit how broke the other ones are. And sometimes they're tough conversations. But if we have those conversations within the other systems, how we take care of ourselves, what we want our family to look like, the rest will be easier and more joyful.
I love that so much. There's so much good stuff in there. I was thinking about, you have this opportunity to prioritize, and most of us feel like we have to choose our priorities. How did you prioritize both growing your family and growing your business?
Okay. Well, one thing that I always say is I have a priority list in my house. It's my priority list, probably very similar to everybody else's. I put it in 2 places in the house because the first one you forget, the second one will be your reminder. And it's I'm a servant of God, I'm a wife to Nicholas, I'm a mother of 4, and then I'm owner and designer of all the brands. So when I reference that, I think, okay, does this serve God? Does this interrupt my marriage too much? Like, obviously, some things are going to dive together. And then does this allow me to be a good mom? And then I get to choose okay, yep, I can go ahead and pursue that. So having your priorities in order is key. And your question was, how do I do both while keeping both a priority? Well, making sure that whatever I take on for work honors the ones that I have set before it. And so I'm talking anytime I get a podcast request for this, I look at both calendars. I look at my home calendar and I look at my work calendar. What's going on today? There's homecoming going on today, but this interview is early in the morning. I'm like, so that's not going to interrupt anything there. I could still go to the pep rally. I could still go to the game. So I think it's looking at all of them, but remembering that the family comes first, because I don't want to repeat the scene I had with my son, Gus, at 18 months. And so, yep, I've said no to things too throughout the years that would have been big things for work, but the relationship that I had with my kiddos and my husband is more important.
Yeah, I love that you post. So in my mind, I have that priority list, but I love that you actually post it. I think that could be a helpful, practical tool for so many people to just take a Post-it note, put it on your bathroom mirror, put it beside your sink or in your pantry on the wall to help you remember as you're going about your day. Whether you work at home, work from home, work outside the home, wherever you are, I think putting that list up would be so appropriate. Such a good practical tool. So you've talked a lot about this blend, and it's such a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I do have a busy family. I do have this very multifaceted life with work and home and prioritizing all the things that you've mentioned and branding. And so when I look at doing life well, both at home and with work, I like to have those top tips, So I'm going to ask you to provide us your 5 top hacks for doing both your home and your work well together.
Ooh, okay. Well, the first one was already given. I do think you need to post your priority list somewhere because it'll help guide your decisions throughout the day. It makes it super simple to say yes, and it makes it easier to say no when you're like, yeah, it's just not a priority right now. Because we're all super busy, but the best soft no you can give is, oh, I love that, but right now I'm prioritizing blah, blah, blah. Then it's just like, it's a soft no, but it also lets them honor what you're prioritizing at the time. So that's the first tip to doing both home and work life together. My second one is, I would be just this is so simple, but you guys, it's going to go on my gravestone. I do it so often. I time everything. Now, I don't time everything all the time. I time it once and I have an approximate idea of what it is. And then when I have timed it, I no longer get stressed about the question, well, I don't know how long it's going to take. So think about this. The school writes and they say, hey, we need a 9x13 pan to serve the teachers for the whatever event coming up. Or you can volunteer for the book fair from 3 to 7 p.m. or whatever. And you're like, I don't know how long it takes me to make cookies. And today is packed. Today is so packed. But because I have timed it, I know, this is so funny. I know that brownies take me 13 minutes to get put together and just another 13 minutes to bake, approximately. Probably a little bit less than that. But anyways, about 30 minutes. So if I have 30 minutes in the day that I could make the brownies, which by the way are dump and then you take off and you do stuff during it, right? I could volunteer for the pan of brownies. But can I volunteer for the 4 hours they asked for the book fair? Nope, not happening. Okay. So I actually sign up frequently for baking things because I've timed how long it takes me to bake things. I don't get overwhelmed and stressed out when the email comes through because I want to serve my community. I want to serve my school and I want to serve my kiddos. It doesn't stress me out because I know. Same thing with you get in the house and you're like, gosh, I got to get to work, but the dishes need to be done. And the dishwasher I'll just feel better if I just do those things. And then your brain's like, no, we're going to do work. But since I've timed it, I'm like, okay, the dishes are probably going to take me 5 minutes. Now, we didn't have a ton of dishes, right? That would take longer. And then I know the dishwasher takes 4 minutes because I harp on my children about this all the time. Like, you just spent 4 minutes arguing about the dishwasher that took 4 minutes. So I know, okay, do I in fact have 10 minutes that I can get this area clean, my home area clean, so that I can hyper focus on the work system when I get in that? Yes, I do. And sometimes I don't. But I didn't stress about it because I knew, okay, that's about 10 minutes a task. Do I have that? So I had more clarity and more joy going, no, I'm not doing it today. I'm getting to work. Great. Or do I have the 10 minutes? So when you time things, you feel way less stress and overwhelmed because you have an approximate idea. And the challenge for you is over the next week, think how many times you say, I have no idea how long that takes. My husband asked me to make him a sandwich. We're in the middle of harvest right now. I was running a kid I was taking a kid home from volleyball and doing homework or quizzing a kid in the car for their test coming up. Nicholas calls. He says, hey, can you make me a sandwich? It's 9 p.m. at night. He hasn't even eaten supper. I'm like, but rather than getting stressed about it, because I was only about 5 miles from home, I could make the sandwich. I knew the sandwich would only take me about 10 minutes and it would take me about 5 minutes to get to him. So that's 15 minutes of reminding him that he is a priority. So it didn't stress me out and overwhelm me. Like, why are you asking at 9 p.m. at night? First of all, I do want to serve him and I want to serve him with joy. And I'd already timed. It only takes me a little bit to make the sandwich. So that's the second tip is time everything so you have an approximation of how long things take, way less overwhelm. Also permission. It doesn't have to be stopwatch. I mean, you don't need to legalize this. Just take an approximate time. Dentist appointments, drives, making lunches, work system, time how long it takes you to check email. Because here's the thing, if it's taking you 3 hours to check email, do you have that time? And maybe you do, maybe you want to prioritize, or could you get somebody to help you out? Or do you need to unsubscribe? Take note of how long things are taking so you can either make it more efficient or effective. Tip number 3 is that you got to 1% it. Okay. This will also be written on my tombstone because my kids are like, oh my gosh, Mom. we feel overwhelmed. We are doing how many roles? You heard about all my roles. We know about Rachel's roles. There's a ton of things going on. So it can feel overwhelming. Even if we're timing things, it can still feel overwhelming, right? So I always say 1% it, meaning you want to write a book, then your 1% is Googling it. Making a phone call to somebody who has. It might be sending yourself a text message that says, I'm going to start writing my book tomorrow. 1% your big goal or your small goals. I need to do the dishes when I get home, but that pile of dishes is going to take 30 minutes. We're going to 1% it. We're just going to clean for 5 minutes. We're just going to tidy up the kitchen for 5 minutes. We're going to do 5 minutes worth of dishes. 1% things, because the 1% helps your brain relax that you did put some effort towards it. It's not like, I have to do that, I have to do that, I have to do that, because you've already put a little bit of 1% at it. Chances are you get a little momentum and you may finish it, not necessarily that day, but even the book concept, you Google it and you're like, oh gosh, that was a good article. Tomorrow I'm going to take some steps towards it. So then you 10% it, then you 20, you'll get the momentum, but just 1%ing it is the most practical, easy, tiny little nugget that you can do that will keep moving you forward. So 1% it.
So I would phrase that as, what is one thing that I can do today to propel this big goal forward? And I agree with you 100%. Just that little tiny step can give you the joy and the fulfillment to do the next step and then the next step. And I operate in that way so much. I appreciate that tremendously. Well, you've given us some great, great tools. You are on the Untangling Prayer podcast. And so I wanted to ask you, how does prayer really fit into your systems? You've talked about these 5 systems. And so I would love for you to help us understand how prayer fits in your systems.
Well, consistently, because we are moving so many different directions and so fast, that I've really taken to heart, pray without ceasing in Thessalonians. Pray without ceasing, because while I do have moments that are set apart, and mine are early in the morning with burpees and Jesus is what I call it. They are set apart. And I pray. I have a beautiful picture of Jesus, and that's when we're like set apart and praying. However, it's not always going to be like that every day. And so the pray without ceasing is like, I have really practical things that I do. So feel free to borrow them. But before we can turn the radio on or Spotify or podcasts or anything, we have to say 5 things that we're grateful for, and they can't be the same as the next guy over. And so the kids and I say 5 things. So that's a moment of prayer. I try not to have when I'm by myself and I'm driving, I love podcasts and books for that matter, but I set a timer to them. And then when the timer goes off, then I spend time in prayer also. Because talking with him is going to get me further than 1,000 books would ever be. So because my brain is so fast and I'm running so many things, I have to set up natural, practical things to remind me about the prayer process. And same thing with the kiddos. When I start to get stressed out, or I can see they're getting stressed out, the first thing is like, let's just take a deep breath out. And that's a breath prayer. And then that too, I'm like, let's just breathe in and breathe out. If you don't have words for Jesus, that's okay. But let's just breathe in and breathe out. And we know that that's already a prayer in itself. Those are some practical things we do for prayer.
I love it. I love it so much. And I think what you're telling us, which is what I share on the podcast all the time, is that prayer does not have to be one certain right way. There is no one single right way. It's just lifting ourselves and remembering and integrating Jesus in our conversation throughout the day. Love it so much. So the last thing that I think, Rebecca, I want to share with our listeners today, because I know this is a purposeful place of conversation for you. And that is, you have this renewed sense of joy. You've been through so many hard things, and we have that in common. There's such a camaraderie there. The first conversation I had with you, I was like, you just got to love Rebecca. Like, she has so much gumption. And I think the place to where I wanted to end the conversation is just, how do you have this connection between prayer and this renewed sense of joy that you have? Because you've talked several times about being creative and having joy and how that works in your life. So could you connect prayer and that sense of joy for us?
Well, like I said, in the beginning, God created. So it was something that initially gave him a lot of joy. And I think even if you're listening, you're like, I am not creative. You're wrong. We were created in his image, and he loved to create. So whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's a chore chart, whether that's like baking, or these are all domestic things, but I'm talking about anything that you created that you step back and you're like, I'm so good. That was a moment of joy because you were creating. Okay. So that's where a lot of my joy comes from. But joy and prayer too is through hardships and trials and that sort of thing is like, I always feel so much better after I've talked to him. Like, not every time, but there's a sense of like happiness is just very surface, but joy is deep seated that in the end, above all else, in the end, he is still going to keep restoring me and asking for it continually. Renew my joy in you. And part of the systems, because I operate them so frequently and then also coach on them, is that when you get clarity with the things that matter and all the gifts and the roles you've been given, which don't deny that, do you not think that he sees you fit to do them? He knew you'd have twins. He knew you'd be really ambitious and have all these roles. He knew you were going to write the big book. He knew you wanted to do all these things. He already knows all that. And he also knows that you can pursue joy in them. So take a deep breath out and go, okay, he already saw this fit for me. So that means I can already do this. And that to me is super joyful. When you get clear on the systems, because you're like, you know what? I could do this. I could totally do this. You're free to have so much more joy because you're not worried about what's for supper because you made the decision at 7.
Yeah.
So, when somebody says, hey, do you want to do this? You're like, yeah, I could do that because I don't have to put out whatever for supper because I already made that decision. Like, to me, the clarity within the roles that we already know God sees us fit to do allows me so much more room for joy.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Rebecca. I feel like you and I could just keep going forever, but I want to make sure that people know where they can connect with you.
Sure. If you go to the encouragerpodcast.com, there is a pop-up right there that will say 2 simple hacks for each of the systems that I talked about. So if you're listening to this and you're like, gosh, I do want some more clarity and I want a little bit more joy. These are 2 simple hacks for each one of those systems. And a little pro tip, especially if you're listening. When you download this and you start to fill it out, the one that is the hardest to implement is probably the system you need the most work on. So start with that one. Okay. And remember, guys, you're just 1%ing it. If you can't even fill out 2 questions for each one, you just want to fill out 1, that's okay. That's okay. But the one that is the hardest to kind of implement is probably the system that you need the most work on. Get that one solid, and then you can have joy for all of them.
So great. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here today. And to our listeners, until next time, God sees you and knows your need. Hey friend, quick reminder, the audiobook version of Desperate Prayers, Embracing the Power of Prayer in Life's Darkest Moments has arrived. It dropped last week. You can purchase that audiobook wherever you listen to books. Thanks for joining me on the Untangling Prayer podcast. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who could use a little hope. And be sure to subscribe for more. Until next time, keep seeking, keep trusting, and keep praying.
Now and in his shows, he would say, that Pat Boone, he's so religious. I shook hands with that boy the other day. My whole right side sobered up. and I would repeat that in my act, and I said, it did. And then I'd go ahead and sing my song.
Pat Boone shares some of his incredible life story on The Walk, a podcast for worshipers. Join us weekly to hear conversations and devotionals from the artists of the church. The Walk can be found on lifeaudio.com, worshipleader.com, or your favorite podcast platform.